So, hi everyone. Thanks for joining us today on May 1st. So today we have a guest with us who's going to have an important conversation about community organizing. So we'll get to that in a minute. I'll just quickly introduce myself. My name is Tanya Kappo, and I am from the Saddle Lake Cree Nation. I am coming to you today from Winnipeg. I have been, I think, in perimenopause for at least the last 4 years. So it's been, feels like forever already. Lots of challenging times physically through this stage in life. So one of the things that has been reoccurring in my mind is what can we do for each other, and what can we do together to help us get through this? What were our teachings about menopause as Indigenous people? Trying to find out how much we can learn about it from our perspective. So from my perspective, it would be from the nêhiyaw perspective. But what was it like for nôtokwêw to be going through this stage in life, and what did it mean? So that is kind of leading me into today's conversation. So before we get to our guest and asking her to introduce herself, turn it over to Christy to give a few opening comments.
Hi, everybody again. I'm so glad that you're able to join us today on this, well, where I live, it's 5 degrees and rainy and no leaves are out yet on May 1st. So it's cold and miserable, but it feels good to get together to talk about community any day of the week. And so here we are. One of the things that we've sort of noticed in our own journeys, Tanya and I, and also listening to previous guests, is that advocacy for ourselves and for others around this time within the medical health profession is needed, but also is community organizing needed around this as well, is a question that keeps coming up, because the healthcare system on its best days doesn't address menopause within the general population, let alone among or for Indigenous peoples. So what happens is people are wondering how they can support each other, how they can support, how they can get support for themselves through this time. It's a great time of change and of really good things, but also with some of the physical things, we can't seem to find the answers or what we need for my own self. When I went to my doctor to get tests and things done for complaints I was having, which I later learned were all completely normal and associated with menopause. Not once did anybody in the medical field ever ask me if I was experiencing menopause, or when was my last moon time, or nothing. It was just like, it's not even a thing. And so there's need for support, and also for finding out, as Tanya was saying, what are our traditions and how can we get together with people at the community level to strengthen this time, which has been referred to coming into our own power. So I really like that. I like hearing that. I like feeling that. And that's what it feels like for me. So without further ado, we're going to turn it over to Lana to introduce herself.
Hi. Tansik akiana wagamaгаnak. First of all and foremost, Nia Aisinuoma Otsi Aski. I am a human of this earth. Gwa Lana Whiskeyjack Netsigason, Onyx Kopona Tsekotinia, Gwa Eotoskeano Tapas Nêhiyaw, Mina, professor at the University of Alberta. In the Department of Women and Gender Studies. I'm also an artist. I'm from Saddle Lake Cree Nation. And well, my belly button connections are from Saddle Lake Cree Nation, which I love starting out with just a reminder that we are human of this earth. We come from a huge kinship system, our nôtokwêw, we come from this land, and first and foremost, which was a beautiful teaching by late George O'Cheese. And it was around just a reminder that, even though we come from certain communities and we're land-based, but that we still have a vital role as being Aisinu, beings of this land. And so I often, especially when I'm teaching courses around matriarchy, rematriation, Indigenous feminism, I often say, I warn my students, I come from a long line of dirty old ladies, including these two, Nokumpa and Caroline Whiskeyjack Agua, my other grandmother, Bella Dion. They're both sisters. And I always like to think of them as my spiritual backups. I've learned so much from them. Nukum was a medicine woman. She was a midwife in Saddle Lake before they forced women to have babies in hospitals. And and they were just old ladies who loved to talk when they were gathered in their groups, whether it was hand games, cards, cooking, ceremonies. You can hear those old ladies laughing and correcting behaviors through their humor, which really impacts the work I do as well. And so I also come from the Thunderbird Eagle clan, which is something we're just returning to as well, being from Treaty 6 territory, is we've lost that connection to our clan systems. And so I'm so grateful to my auntie Joanne Saddleback to find that out of our belly button connections and find our clans. So that's been a beautiful kind of reclamation as well, to continue to guide the work we do as Esquewak, Tastawiniwak, Isinuwak, and especially around this work. So that's a little bit about me. I'm a mom, I'm a cookum, wife.
Thanks. So the way that you're describing your kukumuk kind of just brings into my mind what I feel like the direction I'm hoping that our communities are able to return to go back to those, important visiting as a ceremony. I think in the beginning when we were talking with Maria Campbell, a lot of it was about visiting, getting the information, even when we were trying to figure out and learn what was the word that we called menopause in Cree. And so through that process, you have to go visit people. You don't just like phone them up and say, hey, how do you say this? Well, I mean, I suppose you could, but that's not the proper way. And you lose out on a lot of the important nuances. So visiting is definitely, I think, what I envision in terms of this community organizing, for lack of a better phrase, I suppose. So I know when you and I had chatted maybe last summer or so, you were telling me about this group of women that you meet with, gather with, and visit with on a regular basis. And so when Christy and I started talking about menopause and how we need to do it more and what can we do, one of the things that came to mind was immediately you and the efforts that you're doing there around gathering with people with uteruses to talk about all kinds of things related to that, not just menopause. And so an important part of these conversations for me and Christy has been to try to figure out what can we help, encourage, and suggest to people to help them get through this phase in their life, because it can be very challenging. And, I share Christy's experiences where there's no real medical awareness quite yet, no support in that way. And so one of the tools, I suppose, is community organizing to start to do that work, to get together and to build those kinships, rebuild those kinships, and talk about stuff. So I wanted you to come and invite you to talk about your group of people and how it came to be, and maybe just a sample of some of the kinds of conversations and the name of your group and why you were calling it that.
Absolutely. I'm going to kind of, I guess, begin a little bit with just sharing, if it's okay, around my Miss Bio story as well, my uterus story, because I think that really is a basis to the creation of our group. Which is Kappo, our laughing beaver. So I can share a bit more, but really when we look at the roots of that, it all goes back to those womb connections and our relationship with our womb. And I think that's an important question, especially when we look at our moon pause time of what is our relationship with our Miss Bio or Bin, our woman medicine, as my grandmother would say, that's our most powerful medicine that we have as of beings of this land, is that woman, that womb, or for men who also have wombs, is that looking at, how what we came into in this world, like what we inherit from our mothers and grandmothers and what they went through, especially for those who went through Indian residential school. And that fear at a young age around being that young girl and growing up with that fear and guilt and shame. And one of my very first digital stories was actually on that theory, same as Christine, is like having my moon time after my third child when I was 29, having my moon time for 2 to 3 weeks every month. And of course, as anemic, 6 years of going through many specialists, asking questions, trying to find out why. I couldn't be involved in ceremony. I was too tired to visit. I was working at what is now University of Alberta, and couldn't climb stairs and I was in my 30s. So the doctor, and I've tried many medicines. The one that actually lasted a long time, the longest out of the medicines, was we had some Yahe healers from Colombia visiting Saddle Lake at the time for a medicine gathering, and they were staying at my home, with my family's home. They asked my husband why I wasn't coming to the ceremonies. My husband explained, well, she's out, she always has her time. So they actually did Luciano, the Yahe healer, brought me in my front room and did this medicine and singing to my back, and I just felt a shift, and it was the longest time at that time. 6 months I had kind of a somewhat normal nêhiyaw. And so we got to the point where, and then it came back and it was heavy. It was the same thing. And some of the symptoms when you bleed that much is you're not only the anemia and lack of energy, but just your thoughts around death. Like people don't talk about that with anemia comes like this fascination with death. And I had crazy dreams. I don't know if it was a lack of with iron or blood in my system, and so I started visiting in those dreams or getting visits in those dreams. Long story short, I went to the doctor because I had to get a lot of blood transfusions, and all these different systems weren't working, medical systems. Finally, the doctor said, Lana, you can go to sleep and not wake up because you're that low on blood. And it was really scary because, I had my 6-year-old and my 2 older children. And so I had a hysterectomy. And my first digital story was actually on that hysterectomy. And, in our Cree ways, we can't talk about ourselves without naming where we come from and those we come from. But what I learned from that again, that visiting and asking questions, was that the wombs I came from, so many of them had hysterectomies. Like this was something I did not know. I did not know, like so many wombs I'm connected to also went through that. And so I really thought about what nêhiyaw, nôtokwêw, what they went through in those schools and the trauma on their wombs and how we carried trauma in our wombs. And that's what I felt like, we needed to start talking about. And so the conversations happen once I shared that video. It's no longer up because I need to control how my story is shared, because that's got me in trouble when you start talking about things that, that's been silenced, and you're the first to kind of start talking about these things. Oftentimes lateral violence, which is what happened to me, will follow. And so, there's, when I recall my grandmothers, when they would visit and they would gossip, but that gossip was about to help one another, and so the experiences I had was the gossip that ended up hurting, causing a lot of harm. So I have to be careful. Again, our stories are so powerful, our medicine is powerful. So I only share that in certain controlled settings, especially around teachings, that digital story. But what I needed was in looking at that relationship to our wombs, my womb, was actually found in a lot by also learning the language, nêhiyaw. And, even introducing ourselves, naming where it come from, the root word of both of that utsi, that nitsi, my belly button, was where we all need to kind of start at looking at those relationships. What is our relationship to our own wombs? What is our relationship to our mothers, our grandmothers, our aunties, our children, right? Our grandchildren, and thinking about that and looking at, how my grandmother didn't talk about menopause, but boy, oh boy, did she role model it in her everyday life through that visiting and through her humor and through in those ceremonies and through her authority. The research work I've done really kind of shares about how our grandmothers we had an ethic of non-interference, but it was our grandmothers who actually had the authority to do that direct interference of correcting those behaviors. And so when I was learning, I did this language declaration. I shared it with a bunch of my mentors and extended relatives, that I wanted to learn how to be fluent in prayer and conversation by the time I'm 50, which is this year. And this was about 6 years I made this declaration. I was just finishing up my doctorate work at Belcourt. And part of that was, again, that shame and guilt that those older, especially older men within our communities is like, if you don't know, your language, you can't call yourself a Cree or a nêhiyaw. And so after the 6th time hearing that in a teaching lodge, I'm like, okay, I am going to learn, or I'll go move and be a nôtokwêw in Europe, as was recommended by one knowledge keeper. He's like, if you're going to keep asking those questions in English, you might as well move to England. And I'm like, that rage that happens. And so through that language learning, that declaration about 5 years ago, one of my adopted big sister, the late Roxanne Tutusis, I got a big bag of tobacco and I went to offer it to her. And I told her I wanted to learn the language. Of course, she knew about my language declaration, that I wanted to learn the language, but I wanted to learn it with other Squawak and Tastawiniwak, like our Two-Spirit as well, because I know they have so much to teach us around pleasure and being a human being as well. And that I really wanted to learn a language and humor. And because some of my learnings around language or second language acquisition, or even returning to our language, is the importance of releasing those hormones to create memory, so that we embody and at that cellular level our language. And before nôtokwêw actually passed away, she only spoke Cree. And I remember visiting her and I'd cry because I was like, I couldn't understand a lot of what she was saying to me in Cree. and then, but I did understood her. She's like, and she'd see it get sad, and she's like, Nusum, the language is within you, just agamemo, as we often hear, of keep trying. And so that language part, tobacco is so powerful. Like after I gave that, we ended up like I gathered a group of women at my house. My big sister came, did ceremony, and we started that first circle that got up at Miskwek, Laughing Beavers, and started sharing again, just going back to our relationship to our womb. That's how we started. We didn't laugh that much because a lot of us, again, carried trauma within our wombs of what the impacts on our wombs by others, and the impacts we carried, even our relationship to our wombs. And so that's where it began of having these gathering. At that time, we were having monthly gatherings, mostly at my house, and then we started building almost like this muskamut, this bag of contributions to our circles. Carrying smudge, having a little. I was given a beaver hat, and so these, and then more hats came. So we ended up actually having this bag that whoever was hosting would take our bag full of goodies that would, and then of course our talking stick, and which is a very colorful dildo. And again, like this is all within that laughter of that medicine. So, and it's really interesting, like when you have some of these, when we have conversations, of talking with this, phallic, silly, but really in a sense, like how many have, again, been impact of our sexuality, our gender identity by men, right? And the importance of actually having men to learn about these changes from our first, our first visit from our grandmothers or moon time to, even learning through this. And so it's interesting because my husband, I always come back with a good mood from our gatherings, and while he enjoys how that high of being within that circle lasts for a long time. So as we know, with menopause, I get so angry, rageful easily, especially with him, especially when he interrupts my sleeps, which is, sleep is so precious at this time. And so part of it is, even the Laughing Beavers, again, which is really reflective of that, that medicine that we need at this time to help us release, of having such big belly laughs that we work throughout so much of some of the stresses we carry in our body, the deep conversations, but also the very, very lighthearted conversations. And having like beavers as, they're very important medicine. They work hard. The teachings of beavers of being hard workers, family-centered, Wakotwin-centered, protectors of water, but also, is often used as a metaphor for that, our most powerful medicine. And so, again, like there's so many layered meanings within that we're working in it. Through our laughter, we actually deconstruct and take power away from a lot of words that have power over us, right? We make fun of it. And to me, I think it was Brene Brown that Brene Brown who talks about sarcasm and, basically not encouraging, or how hasn't been a very, we have to be careful with using that kind of language, but in a sense, sarcasm is one of the ways, processes and tools we use to deconstruct or destroy a word that has power over us. It's a way that we talk about the really difficult things in our life, you know, from sexual violence to gendered violence to, you know, breakups to all kinds of, you know, even the cultural toxicity we have in our communities. And so this has been, you know, a very important time where I just feel so, I don't know, womanly, the most womanly, because of being with my other sisters, my sister brothers, you know, of being in circle with them, to laugh and deal with some very challenging things in the world, but also to just be able to strengthen our love to ourselves and to one another. So it's a bit of a long intro to our group, but
I often think about, you know, how we make humor in situations that might otherwise seem inappropriate, but how it always, you know, brings us to a place where we can talk about things, I guess, in a sort of safe way because of the laughter that we talk about things with. So your group came together in the beginning around language, but has evolved to so much more. I think that is really key. You know, a lot of the reclamation work that's happening does start with the language. It also starts around art, different art practices, you know, maybe a beading circle or hide tanning, you know, different things that we're all trying to bring back and relearn the ways from how we used to be and bring them to the more recent, I guess, to today's world is what I'm trying to say. I wondered, when you first started having your circles around language, did it just seem, was it all more like organic in terms of what you talked about? Like you're talking about the words that are used to describe like your body, how you're talking about your relationship with your womb. You know, I really like that. That really resonates. You know, I never thought to think about menopause or any point in my life as my relationship with my womb specifically, but with my relationship with my body generally. So how do those conversations come up when you're meeting with your sister brothers?
After our first conversations of just releasing, right? Releasing some of the, as it was all a square walk in that first meeting of releasing just some of the pain and traumas, like sharing that in a circle with women, you know, of that releasing was really kind of made room for us for the next gathering to now begin to talk. Because with the intention was, when I offered that tobacco, is I really want to learn the language, but I also want to be able, because my research background is around sexual health and rites of passage, and especially around gender and sexual diversity. So which Roxanne, my husband, and I actually started the first Indigenous Parents and Friends of Lesbians and Gays at being voluntold by Dr. James McCocus and his husband, Anthony. And so when we had that second gathering, you know, I knew we wanted to, I wanted to kind of follow in the footsteps of my grandmother's work around having those kind of learning the language of being able to talk about sexual health and in that way that my grandmothers did, of laughing about some of these silly things that women do or relationship happens within our relationships, and to do it in laughter. And one of the things that is actually really important, because when we go in that space, we become, you know, it's like we become these a different type, a different layer of gatherings. Like it's obviously there, this is a gathering like no other because we are coming in with the intention of just releasing and sharing, and without any judgment from one another. And so we actually have our dirty old lady names that we give each other. We go through kind of initiation, rites of passage. Like it's all like, yeah, again, done in this humorous, all in a sense role-playing way of where we start with that smudge, we start with giving our intentions, and then we go into just visiting and laughing, and always food. We always bring food, and we always bring a gift to share with one another, because then we go through like a competition in a sense, which is not really a competition, because each of us will choose gifts. Sometimes we'll steal each other's gifts, of just being able to like dance with our hips, like we were at a water gathering at Kaniasik Culture Camp, and Dr. Kevin Lewis invited a few of our beavers to come and bring some laughter to that space. And we had about 75 women in that circle, and I asked them all to bring a gift. And this was amazing. Like, again, like how when we're able to lead or hold this space where you just let some of those fears go with being in your own body as a woman or as a two-spirit, right? And so we started off with, of course, introducing ourselves, introducing our dirty old lady names or laughing beaver names. And then we got everyone to put their gifts in the center of that circle. And then we started by of course, beginning with spell your name with your hips or your chest. And so it took like the afternoon, but even like the 80-year-old ladies would get up and, they would moves. It was just amazing. And you can see some of the younger teenagers, they would keep moving, and you obviously too shy. Of course, they're teenagers, right? And you've seen all these crazy old ladies and some men getting up and showing their moves, and everyone's like having such a good, just feeling the energy of feeling really good in your body, moving your body, being present, and sharing that laughter, and then the couple of the few teenagers that kept moving, they were like too shy, and they didn't want to dance. So finally some of the old ladies encouraged them, and then they got up and danced, and it was just so great, like to see our intergenerational connections of the younger Esquewawak, seeing those nôtokwêw moving and just being sharing that beauty of being present in their bodies and moving without being afraid to laugh, right? So there's so much courage in those spaces of just being present and enjoying. And so we, I think taken out of context, like how easily someone can misinterpret like these kind of spaces, but for us as as Esquewawak and Testawiniwak, this is kind of the way it's cultural. It's the way we are able to, as I mentioned, express things we every day can't express, right? Being in the spaces. So it just keeps moving in a good way, where we have some who leave, some who come in, but going through this initiation. And we'll ask questions like, what's your relationship with your Ahpin or your, Mispayao, or how happy are you down there, with your medicine? How do you make your medicine happy,
Oh my God, this is so good. I'm so glad you've come on to talk about these things and bring this beautiful, lighthearted humor to it, especially around the issues of trauma. So there's so many things that you've said that I can really connect with, and it makes me think of other things like, you talked about how when you started, and then people started to bring things into, you didn't specifically say the word bundle, but it's almost like your Laughing Beavers bundle that you use for your gathering. And it reminded me of when we started with Walking with Our Sisters, and Tanya and Tara and Savage organized the first one in Edmonton at the university, and it was really apparent right from the get-go that people brought things to for the bundle, I guess. So there was some sweetgrass that came and some stones that came and some other things that came, and then everywhere we went along the way, the bundle just grew. So it reminded me that in community building, I suppose, which is really what's happening, is that you're making community strong and those relationships strong. Things don't have to be perfect at first, you know, that you can, that things will come, that the energy and our helpers or our grandmothers, our ancestors will help this along as you're going. So that's what I was reminded of. And I was really struck by what you said about connecting to the wombs of our ancestors. So thinking about all of those wombs is such a beautiful way to frame the power that we're born from, and that we, you know, are in now. And I was thinking about specifically around trauma, because that's so heavy. As you said, humor is what clears the way for maybe when we talk about coming into our power, coming into our strength, you know, building our communities to be strong, clearing the way first of some of these things that we might be carrying. So the trauma is not easy to clear, obviously. Through humor, you're saying that it can help that process. And I can see that, how we do that naturally. But I also wanted to know about specifically through those processes, through the really difficult parts, in what ways do you support or make sure that people are not left open by the time they leave, or however you might see that part be, because everybody has a different way of seeing ceremonial sort of things about how people are left open, and you know, you need to kind of close that up so they leave in a good way, and that they don't, I guess, it doesn't further re-traumatize people to be speaking about the issues that they've gone through.
Yeah, thank you for asking. This is actually really as we have beavers who come in and this, you know, some move or some, you know, leave, or one of the things that when I first started in gathering women was just saying, I want to talk about the difficult things. I want to be in circle with women who will, you know, share that kind of strength, and become, you know, work towards that kind of nôtokwêw power, that authority, like these old ladies here, you know, of being able to speak about these things in this way. And when you talk in circle, right, when you have like we have specific smudges for certain, you know, feelings, we'll bring certain smudges, like everyone just knows how to naturally take care of one another in that space. And just there is that power when you're sitting in circle, and each, you know, you say you have your own autonomy, because we come in knowing that we're going to talk about these things. You're invited. I forewarn people, because sometimes people will want to bring in another friend who's like, oh, I have a friend, they really need this circle, you know, can I? And I'm like, well, let me scare you. Like, we're going to talk about really difficult things. They have to share in it. I don't say they have to, but, you know, just be forewarned, you know, there's a warning, or, you know, there will be maybe some triggers. But we're gonna, you know, but what happens in that circle is when you are able to talk and release, and when you have other women like those old ladies who are telling those young teenagers, you know, to dance, and when you're almost given like this, kind of like permission to share, because someone else role modeled how to share. So this is a thing why I started off with talking and sharing my own relationship to my room through the digital stories, through the teachings I do, was that I had to learn how to carry my own story first. I have to share that vulnerability, which I see as a superpower, right? The sharing our fire, that nôtokwêw, that spirit fire through that vulnerability. I have to share that if I'm going to ask others, and then I know I'm related to, because I did a 7-year sexual health research work in my community. I knew all the dirty old ladies in my community who weren't, which was still taboo. So they really were, when they're able to discuss and talk about things, again, they were so grateful to talk about those things that we've kept silent, that they didn't know. You don't know what you don't know, but when you are surrounded by mentors or precious other human beings who are sharing that nôtokwêw of their traumas, of their challenges, and in that reciprocity, because this is important, if I'm sharing, it's a law of that reciprocity that you can, that giving and taking from one another. And that's what that circle does. And so laughter, again, has been that importance of being able to kind of, if you're carrying anything, you let it out. Same with the tears. Oh my goodness, like there's as much tears as there is laughter, right? And we're not imposing our, we have almost like these protocols around our laughter. We have protocols around our tears, and we support one another when we're in that circle, and we support each other outside those circles. Like one of our beavers, Nancy, she's now taking a movement of menopause, like she's like training to be a roller skater. So some of us beavers bought roller skates, and now we're joining this Musqueam movement of, these, and I'm like, oh my goodness, I hope I don't, need some hip replacements after like taking care. But part of that, again, like that courage of being able to move and not keep it in our bodies. So we talk about trauma as not as a way of defining us, but how we transform it into a place where, again, we're taking power away from that it has over us when we're able to speak about it and laugh through it and cry through it and move through it. Because in our kind of closing of those circles, that's when we do our kind of competitions, whether it's like drawing, dancing, singing, making skits, we haven't done Indian leg wrestling yet, but that's I think we might do that next time. So yeah, there's and we have those Cree the speakers, we've had Cree, those old ladies, like they're nôtokwêw, elders, that come in and also hold that space, and they hold it with such love and wisdom and beauty of, like these two grandmothers carried, where they still had so much power and medicines of love to share in their many, different ways, and through holding that space for others to just, light our nôtokwêw, give, fanning it with their love and laughter.
I wondered if you are able to or can talk a little bit about any ceremony that you might be aware of that we might have done around menopause, or any teachings that you might have or be aware of about this life change. One of the things that comes up quite frequently between Christi and I in our conversations, and also through some of the people who've been attending these discussions, is this idea of ceremony. Similarly how when we have our first moon time, we have like a coming of age ceremony, or we do different things to really celebrate that and own it. And considering this change in your life with menopause is so significant, there seems to be a void there, a gap, and we're in our conversations hoping to fill it, or maybe create something new, a new tradition going forward. I don't know, something. When we had Dr. Janet Smiley on with us last week or so, she was talking about, menopause in the medical community is actually only one day, literally one day. And it's the day after the 1 year passes since your last moon time. And then after that day, then you'll be known as postmenopausal. So it seemed to me that there was a point in time that you can pinpoint for most people. I know it won't apply to all, but where you could presumably plan and have a ceremony for yourself, or others can host it for you, or however that looks. But anyway, all that rambling, back to the original question about if you're aware of any ceremonies or any teachings around this life change.
Yeah. Yes, absolutely. There definitely some of the teachings I came across. There's teachings that some of our Cree relatives have adopted from the East around the berry fast. But I was also reminded by my mentors that we had our own ceremonies. I'll kind of like, they're actually quite subtle, and you may have gone through these kind of ceremonies without even realizing it. But just acknowledgement from your mentors, from your grandmothers, is in itself a ceremony, right? Like when you go through that first rites of passage of your first, Ewigoi, your first moon time, or when your grandmothers first visit you, going into that lodge. And we had like those lodge, that moon lodge was important to every part of those rites of passage, from that first one to your pregnancy to, your first is a lot as a woman or womb carrier, right? To that last rites, not last rites, but that last time of having that moon time. And yeah, I recall, like in my research work, like menopause was a estrogen deficit, like it was a disease. It was a disease, an estrogen deficit disease. I remember recalling from one of the medical books, and I was like, what? So, this, like that view of menopause from that very Euro male perspective to looking at our Cree ways of that moon lodge. When we start helping within that moon lodge as, nôtokwêws or ceremonial helpers, that in itself is a rites of passage. When we start leading those moon lodges, those teachings, that is a rites of passage, right? When you start teaching the accumulation of that knowledge, that is a time, that's a rites of passage. When you start being acknowledged as a nôtokwêw, as an elder, as a, that is when you're called that, when those, our language is spirit and our words are medicine. When someone acknowledges you, that is like a rites of passage. That naming is so important within our languages, right? So there is that. My last year here in Wiskeyjack in Edmonton, in the River Valley, we've been working with the city actually to as part of the land back of getting a little piece of land called the Heartland, and it's actually shaped like a heart by the North Saskatchewan River. And we had our first moon lodge there for adult women, and led by my beautiful little mother auntie, Joanne, and having this moon lodge of that kind of that adult female kind of rites of passage of getting your certain tools. Everyone like nukum. When I was little, she would always say, never leave home without a mogaman. So I always carry a knife. I actually have a tiny little knife necklace, and the teachings around that, right? When you're gifted something, that is a subtle rites of passage as well. When you're gifted certain medicines or teachings, that's a rites of passage. We often don't think of things like that, but those are ceremonial. Like every day, we don't have a word for art in our languages, right? We have certain descriptions in our language for art making or creating, but we lived in that beauty way. And to be able to gift knowledge, that's a rites of passage. To be able, when you're receiving it, that's a rites of passage. That's a ceremony. And we don't say it like this is a ceremony, we're going to go through that, or when we're learning a song. So there's these many little ceremonies, like my uncle Jerry would talk about when our babies are born, they had a ceremony for their first fart, and their first drink, their first, their first milk, their first, like all of that, their first walk. We had different ceremonies. Some are celebrated more communally, but others are celebrated either through just you and your grandmother, or your auntie, or maybe your group of the woman in your circle, or squelwak or tasnawiniwak in your circle. And so even with your the napel, right? Some of the most beautiful, my male elders were taught by those grandmothers. And so those are often, I find that really interesting, that some of my most beloved male elders that have that kind, gentle lovingness were the ones that were taught by grandmothers. And so that beauty again of when you're sharing knowledge and sharing space like that, those are that is ceremony, right? And seeing that, and that's how we bring sacredness into our life and into our daily practices, is seeing in that, from that view, like the root word of Meskizik is kisik, that sky, but that sky is also related to that light, that divine light, and it's connected to Kitsikizek, our heavens or cosmos. Like there's so much teachings again within our language that reminds us of how to live in beauty, of how to see in beauty, of seeing the light in one another, that kisik and Meskizek, Kitsikizek, Akisigaw, Kisiguan. There's so many words connected to that remind us of how to be in beauty in every day. So you probably went through many little stages of rites of passage and ceremonies without really realizing it. When you start sitting with those old ladies in that circle, you can say you went through a rites of passage. You went through a ceremony in a sense, because that relationship building that you do in community is so important to that acknowledgement of where you're growing into, of becoming that nôtokwêw. And like some of again, like even that teaching of nôtokwêw or a nôtokwêw, I'm still learning my Cree, but of that old lady, which again, that English translation doesn't even it doesn't give the respect and reverence in that sense of how that nôtokwêw of having so many grandchildren, she's short of space in her lodge. And it's about the essence of independence as a squaw, or as an Isinu, because I think everyone should become a nôtokwêw, male, female, being complementary. And how you create space to have that many grandchildren in your lodge, like my grandmother's, is through making sure that you're dealing and processing those pains and traumas, so that you then make space for love and kindness and compassion. So you're not, blaming, shaming, hurting, violating others, their autonomy, their sovereignty, their body sovereignty. Right? And as grandmothers, to me, this is the medicine that this world needs, is to come back and correct those behaviors of acknowledging and supporting those women, those young women, through those different rites of passage, so that they too can become that essence of independence, of power and authority in that kind, compassionate way, but also through rage. I have another group, my academic work, I have what we call RAIG, but it's RAIG, which means Radical Academic Squaw Goddessing, or goddesses. And the importance of, that ethic of creating codes of wellness for Indigenous women within the academy. And again, here in this other setting of the academia, which is very different, that doesn't, academia that kills or doesn't allow spirit in those spaces, as Indigenous women as a Squawak were coming in and trying to take care of one another. We're not doing it in isolation in our own little departments and stuff. We're coming together from different faculties to work together and creating these codes of ethics, right? Of coming into our rage or being outrageous, or and we have incredible mentors like Fiery Dream Graveline, who often calls academia, as she termed it, of being disconnected or being, losing our spirit through our work in the academy. So there's different, like I said, this is part of my life work. It's part of the essence of what I'm carrying on from those nôtokwêw, those wombs I come from.
Oh my goodness gracious. Well, you've just given us so much to think about and to, I feel fired up. I'm normally fired up, but I'm extra fired up now. This is really, really great. I just I'll just make my last comments and then turn it to Tanya, and then we'll give the last word to you, Lana. Thank you so much for coming on and sharing your wisdom and your strength and your experiences of your grandmothers with us, and all the people that you surround yourself with, because that's who you bring with you. That's what I'm reminded of all the time, is that we're not walking alone. We have people with us. Some of them have passed on to that other side, and some of them are still here. And those people that we carry with us everywhere we go give us the strength and the teachings and the ways to be in the world in a good way, and what to say and how to behave. Those corrections that you talk about are so important, and it's not corrections like scolding. It doesn't have to be. It can be corrections through humor. It can be corrections through just through age, learning, how not to repeat the mistakes of the past. Corrections in that way too. We can correct ourselves. Also, I was just thinking about what you said about language. You brought in so much language here, and I'm so grateful for that. As a language learner myself, my grandparents spoke Cree. They're both from Lac St. Anne in Alberta. My dad was born there. He spoke Cree for the first 5 years of his life. Unfortunately, that language is not passed down to me, but I'm actively trying to learn and have been trying to learn for a very long time. And one thing that I was just watching one of Doreen Oak's videos the other day, and on the lessons. I forget Kappo, is it? I forget which authority, education authority put those videos out, but they're really good for anybody who wants to go check out these Cree language lessons, I suppose. And what she said was, when she was talking to her aunties, they really stressed upon her how the kinship terms are disappearing out of our language and out of usage, and mainly because it's English, or it's because we are English speakers trying to reclaim our languages, right? So we're losing those kinship terms, and that was really stressed upon her. So she spent many of her lessons using those kinship terms in with her lessons. And what I found really amazing about that was just how complex our kinship terms are, and how relearning those kinship terms and using those kinship terms, but not just using them in a superficial way, but bringing them in within us, really helps also to strengthen our sense of community and where we come from and who we belong to and who we are a part of. And creating those circles as bigger and stronger circles. So with that, I'll just say thank you so much for coming, and I'll turn it over to Tanya.
Okay.
Thank you. I just really wanted to say thank you, Lana, for accepting the invitation to come and share today. I think what really comes to my mind right now is, in terms of the community organizing or the visiting, or what we can do to support ourselves, is around kinship. And just following a little bit of what Christy was just talking about, our kinship terms in our language. One of the things that we also try to encourage is to really find out what is your language, what were your ways. For us, it's unfortunately very Cree-centric from our point of view, because Christi and I are mostly Cree. Christi is learning some Anishinaabe, so there is some of that. And we are trying to bring in guests from other areas to talk about their language and what do they call it, and all kinds of things like that. But also the community organizing part of it and how you started out in the language, I think, is really key, because it does a number of things. And also, of course, the laughter that comes with it. In terms of learning kinship words in your language, I think what Christi's saying about it not being just superficial, but meaningful, it's Cree language is very much about an action oriented. So not just learning the words to intellectually know the words, but to start embodying them. Because with a kinship brings responsibility. And when you bring those kinship relations to life, you're taking on responsibility and living up to those responsibilities. So it makes me think about what you were talking about, how as a grandmother, and you make space in your lodge or your teepee for all the grandkids or for people to come or something like that. And it makes me feel connected to it in a way of that I myself, as a grandmother, whether or not I have grandchildren, as a matter of fact, I do, but to recognize that there are people out there who haven't biologically given birth, but do have the capacity to become a grandmother in that sense as well. So clearing out that trauma for myself is like making space in my lodge, myself, I guess, for more grandchildren and bringing to life those responsibilities and my responsibility as a nôtokwêw, as I'm getting more into that phase of my life. So I really want to thank you for sharing, because it really helps shift the context for me and my own experience as I'm going on through menopause. As I mentioned earlier, it's quite physically challenging, and it's very easy to get stuck in that mindset of how physically difficult it is, and to not think about the beautiful things that come. So I just wanted again to thank you for bringing your perspective and sharing your words. So with that, I'll turn it over to you for any final last words.
Hi. I think I teach an Indigenous matriarch course, and I often look up science, Western science research that's, that's just barely catching up to Indigenous knowledge, right? And it was, I think, in 2015 when whale researchers discovered through kind of this longitude study of the West Coast orcas that female orcas live longer than males, as do humans. And that actually after post-menopause, they become the leaders of their pods. And so, what has, researchers always thought that males were the leaders of pods, where they realized, again, recently, that it was the females, the post-menopause, those grandmothers, because they live like twice as long as the male orcas. And that their kids all live with them throughout their whole life. My baby just flew the nest here, and just, really having that empty nest, but having, of course, having our grandbabies and being able, but we live longer when we're connected, right? When we're connected to others, to our grandkids, like the research is catching up. But this is all a part of our nôtokwêw, those laws of our kinship. And I think, when we're talking about this is also, especially from a woman, is the importance of our men being in our space to learn about this. Like, I give great gratitude that my husband is, is so, he's pretty manly man. I always joke he only has like 3 feelings of hungry, angry or horny. Poor guy. Sometimes he says, I put the Cree and creep the amount of inappropriate things I say. but just the importance of our men to know, like, have that, be in those spaces to learn about this, so they're reminded of their roles and responsibilities as nôtokwêw, you know, and also role modeling. I always tell our granddaughter, just mush them around. You're the, you know, you're the little ogamaw, you're the center. So, you know, that she knows her role and responsibility of growing into a nôtokwêw. So I really appreciate you both for the invitation. This is such passionate work around from, you know, looking at our wombs and the importance of coming back, you know, as our wombs, as that lodge, you know, of creating space in our lodges to lead in that kind, compassionate way, but also with such authority that we're reclaiming our autonomy and our sovereignty as grandmothers, as even, you know, as you said, like one of my auntie Joanne says, we don't count our children or grandchildren, because again, we don't count them because you never know who needs to come in that lodge where you can be a mother to someone who doesn't have a mother. This again is part of our walk, nôtokwêw, where if you lost a sister, you can adopt to fill that void, not to replace, of course, but to fill with that your lodge with that love, with that compassion and connection. So thank you for both coming into my lodge, and I hope we continue to supporting each other in good ways through laughter. And I'm so grateful to my beavers for being there, and they know how much I love them. And of course, my rage goddesses. So hi, Mr. Here, Ninaskum Nêhiyaw, Nêhiyaw, Esquewak.
Awesome, thank you.